Hey everybody, it's the Commodore from the Clan of the Grey Wolf, and you are watching the weekly Wringer series here on clanofthegraywolf.com. Here's hoping all of you had a tremendous Easter weekend, and I'm glad that you're back with me to take in next week's edition. Alright, so last week, what we're going to do today, we're going to wrap up the question from last week, which had to do with guilty pleasures. Great outpouring again from the community. Can't wait to get to some of your highlights, and then I will show off a few of my own guilty pleasures, and we can talk about all of them. And then I'm going to ask you a question that will test your knowledge of cable back when we were all just little kids. So, more TV-related stuff to come. All right, so yes, so last week we had a question about guilty pleasures, and I asked you what was the greatest geeky guilty pleasures that you all have, and we had a lot of great responses, and they kind of coalesced into a number of different areas or arenas, and I'm going to highlight those specifically right from the get-go. They usually really either were about were encompassed by collecting. That was a big thing. Video games, collecting posters was one of them. You know, collecting TV, collecting video game music, doing some kind of collecting activity. That seems to be a bit of a guilty pleasure. We talked about anime and manga quite a bit. I don't know, anime, manga. I say anime. It doesn't really matter. The point is, Japanese cartoons. We seem to like them a lot, and or even we like graphic novels. But not necessarily collecting, just reading. So there's a lot going on there. And I have to also say Sailor Moon seemed to be something that kept coming up there. And out of all the anime that you guys probably could have put up there, I've never really liked it. It's not my thing. That being said, I know a lot of people that love it, and I certainly respect all of you, as you know, for watching it. But never been my thing. But Sailor Moon was definitely one of those things that I used to enjoy, even though I don't know, I never really obsessed about it or anything. So maybe that means it was a guilty pleasure of mine at one point. I don't know. I talked about collecting music, but soundtracks and music to video games, things like that, that tends to be more of a guilty pleasure, doesn't it? It seems like that's not very widely accepted by the population at large. So, and I'm not even sure that's what makes a guilty pleasure. And maybe sometime we'll have a great Echo Screen podcast about that topic. So it seemed that a lot of them, and the other category was just kind of anal things that you do, spreadsheets or well, I mean, and some of you actually put musicals on there. Some of you have musicals, and musicals, I have to say, I would probably throw out there, I mean, music is really, really, really accepted, especially now with things like Glee. The pop culture really does like musicals, but I would still call watching some musicals a guilty pleasure. If you're not putting in the latest action movie in lieu of My Fair Lady, I would say that's a bit of a guilty pleasure. That's just the way it's perceived. I'm not saying that you guys should feel bad about it because, I do happen to like some movies. By the way, West Side Story does rock. You speak truth. Absolutely 100% could not agree more. All right, so now I'm going to talk about a few of the contributions from last week that I just thought needed some highlighting. We could talk a little bit more about. First of all, I want to say thanks to Mr. K for correcting me. It's not General Hospital that's going off the air. It's One Life to Live. And so this is why it's great to have a community, because sometimes when I say things, things just kind of come out of my mouth. I didn't process it all the way, and or I just forget, in which case I make something up like I did last week with General Hospital. I don't know where that came from, but Mr. K and all of you, I'm sure, would have stepped up to the plate, corrected my error. It is One Life to Live that's going off the air, not General Hospital, and I'm sure all of you are tremendously excited about that. Anyway, so thanks, Mr. K. Because the whole conversation really began off those soap operas, and I want to say right off the get-go that some of you, I don't think any of you actually talked about soap operas. I think one person might have mentioned General Hospital as something they did with their grandparents. Okay, cool, gotcha. But I was very surprised. I thought some of you would talk about soap operas. So, see, you guys surprise me every week in a good way, and I like that. All right, so I'm going to talk about this. Tommy James came up with one that got me going with wrestling. Yeah, man. Certainly am not into wrestling and haven't been into wrestling for over 10 years. But when I was a kid, I used to jump up and I used to go to the video store and rent WrestleManias just to see what happened on video, okay? Sometimes even in lieu of getting a Nintendo game, I would instead rent a WrestleMania. And I think by the time I was of a certain age, 10 or 11 years old, I think I had rented every WrestleMania they had at the store. So, I certainly understand the wrestling. That is a guilty pleasure. I know several friends of mine actually still do really enjoy wrestling. If any of you know the Spoony one from that guy with the glasses, he particularly loves wrestling and certainly have mad respect for the Spoony one. Mike, 352 talked about musicals. We spoke about that, but I like the musicals you listed. I thought there was great attention to. You guys didn't just throw any crappy musical out there. You mentioned some of the really great musicals out there, and I just wanted to say thanks for opening up the musicals bin there, Mike, because it really changed the conversation. All of a sudden, we had a full blown conversation about musicals on clanofthegraywolf.com, and that is the kind of thing that the Wringer, for me, it's just what it's supposed to do. It's not necessarily going to be the same thing that we always talk about all the time. I don't want it to be that. I want to really expand that conversation. And if I end up with a thread full of musicals on a weekly Wringer, that is okay with me. You guys rock. And Lester Normal, I'm going to mention your name correctly since I screwed it up last week. Thanks so much again for being a part of the community. I'm glad we make you all feel welcome. I try to mention new people as they register as good as I can. I don't always do a great job of that, but I'm going to mention you this week because I totally butchered your name last week. But you also brought up one I thought really deserves mention, and that is LARPing. I have several friends of mine that know that I play D&D, and the joke that they tell me is that, I'm not the biggest geek or whatever the case might be because I don't LARP. So it's almost like, even though they're not geeky people, because they know that I am a geek, we still get to joke about LARPers. That goes to speak about the kind of, the hierarchy of geekdom, if you will, and maybe what guilty pleasures are all about, because some levels of geekdom really just kind of surround themselves with guilty pleasures. I think there's a compelling argument to be made there, and one that someone who is, if not much smarter than me, someone who is much more connected academically and has the time to write something, I'm sure they'll write that work about geekery being just about guilty pleasure indulgence. But not today. But let's talk about LARPing for a second. So, Lester Normal did a fantastic job of throwing out the definitions and kind of the background. Couldn't agree more. Although I've never done it, I've never LARPed. I have to say that that really got me going, because LARPing really is kind of a one of those big guilty pleasures. I know if any of you have not, it gives me an opportunity to mention this. If any of you have not seen the film Darkon, Darkon, which Darkon is actually a series of rules a la D&D that are used in a LARPing for battles. It's just for battles, for encounters, all kinds of things. It just gives a general rule set. It's like a universe, basically. Darkon is a fantastic movie that follows the course and path of two regular guys that have regular jobs that LARP on the weekends with a bunch of people. I mean, just bunches and bunches and bunches of people. Actually enough to build two armies and siege each other's castles and have full-blown wars. And they just have these completely different alter personalities, and you absolutely must see it if you have not. Thank you for bringing that up, Lester Normal. That's a great contribution, and you guys need to see Darkon, because it will absolutely... it'll make you smile, and it will show you that the geekery runs deep among all populations. So, moving on with that, I wanted to talk about some of my guilty pleasures, and we've even talked about a few of them now. I did used to watch wrestling, even though I don't anymore, and I do love video game music to the point of it being a little embarrassing. You guys can see Play video game poster. One of the very first videos we actually